Very, very dark, very cold, 29 degrees and falling. It was about 31 degrees at 3 when I got up. And that was one of those where I was awakened at 2, probably by the planets, and just lay there hoping to get back to sleep, and finally said, that's it. Let's just get up and do stuff. Anyway, so I want to tell you an early or a late night or an early morning story. It's about thinking and how to think about things. It's one of those ponderables. Let's ponder for a minute. It's a story. It's hypothetical. Okay, it's a fictional story. Some of it's based on aspects of my life that are factual. So it's factual that I'm an old fart, and it's factual that I have lived all around this planet, and it's factual that I have spent the first 17 years of my life living on military bases or places very close and associated. When you grow up as a military brat, so I was an Army brat. My dad was in the Army. He was in the 101st Airborne paratroopers, shock attack guys. But we lived on Air Force bases. My uncle and his 2 brothers were in the Air Force. We spent time on Air Force bases. In Alaska, we lived on an Air Force base for a while. So I've got friends that derive from other branches of the service. And there's a commonality that runs through, sort of a theme that runs through military brats who are the kids of officers, right? Career military people. Also, warrant officers and so on. There's 2 career paths there. And this common thread is that it's sort of intergenerational, right? I mean, you go into the military because your father was in the military, that kind of thing. And then later on you get out of those jobs and maybe you get involved in some other aspect of the military-industrial complex. I lived, as I said, for 17 years on military bases, grew up on it. I analyzed the absolute hell out of it, did not want that for myself because of the constraints on your thinking and so forth, right? It's a rigid way to live. And I desired to see something that was different than I had had before. So I get out, I didn't get out. I left the house and, started my own life. And over the course of time, I got, you'd get in contact with people. They'd ask how you're doing and so on. And you'd say things and things like this. Oh, yeah, I'm working for these people doing this kind of a project or whatever. And I've had, given my mindset that, I didn't like the rigidity of thinking of the military life. It's not unexpected that I've had a very eclectic working career, done all kinds of things. But I had jobs. Maybe I had 50 different jobs in my 20s and 30s, and then I fell into creating software, writing code, or rather, it grew up around me, and I took advantage of it being there. And so I started doing that. It was fun. It's a giant mind puzzle, the analysis, writing all the little chunks, looking for design patterns, trying to be efficient in how you do it, and anticipating the growth of the project. It's very engaging. So in the course of that kind of activity, I found that consulting was the place where money was at, that I could do software engineering. I could see the projects very clearly just by a few levels of the specifications, and I was good at it. And so I started consulting for all of these various different companies. So I spent a lot of time in CEO boardrooms, that kind of thing. The common thread there was that no matter what company I was working for, and some of them were government, like the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, state governments all over, Mexican government, all of this kind of thing, right? Where they had need for an analysis and for a design, and then later for implementation of that design. Frequently, I would supervise or consult on the implementation part of the project after the design. So I might be involved with them for many years, but it was an intense period in the beginning, and then they would just contact me intermittently. And so that became sort of a method of operation. I might have 4 or 5 projects going at any given time simply because there was no need for me on site, but they would occasionally run into predictable points of progress. Sorry about that. My dogs are deciding who's going to get that last little bit of crunch. Anyway, so I consult, right? People call me up. I retired a long time ago. Got into doing the predictions and pretty much drilled down in on my own software analysis, large language model, algorithm kind of thing, right? Did the predictions, got into the cryptos, and really had no need to work, but I'm quite fascinated by solving problems. It's something I like. So I've still done that over the years, solve problems. I don't charge people for this. It's really the only people I consult for now are acquaintances, people I've, or friends, the people I've dealt with in the past that have a problem that requires my level of cogitation on it. Okay, and so I've got a reputation for thinking so far out of the box you can't even see the box in the background. Hey, chatto mate kudasai. Sorry. Anyway, and so, that reputation occasionally comes in handy to people because they run into circumstances that provide them a decision point for which they don't have an effective reference. It's not anything they've ever done or encountered in the past, and I'm pretty good at that. So this is our fictional story here, right? I'm telling you about the background, the setup, how the character is going to be structured. And then one day he gets a phone call. And this is someone that he's worked with in the past, in the distant past. Someone that's involved in submarines. And he says, hey, Mike, how you doing? And then Mike tells him, blah, 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 blah. I'm not doing so well, right? Now, bear in mind, at the level of our character's interaction with the world, he's basically talking to people that are in his age bracket, maybe as old as the late 50s, but usually in the 60s and 70s, and frequently in the 80s. A lot of these board member guys are in their 80s, and that's because of this thing that's called experience. So, appointing a 30-year-old on a board of directors is kind of, self-defeating, right? Yeah, they may be a technical genius, but beyond that, their life experience is so limited that their vision is also limited. And so the old guys this is why it's the Olde Phartes network, right? Plus, a lot of us have been through shit together, and we know the limits to which we can trust each other. Anyway, so our character here in our story, he doesn't charge these guys money because he's got enough. He doesn't need any more. His needs are simple, and it seems stupid to accumulate it because then it becomes a burden and you have to worry about it, right? An antithesis. I mean, it's not a normal way of thinking in our society because we're not structured to think that way, because it's always accumulate, with never any thought of why or how far. A friend of mine once made a brilliant statement to me, and that was, don't chase profit into the grave. And he was quite right. Anyway, though, so our character here gets a phone call from his buddy Mike, who has a position of power within the management structure of these submarine guys. Anyway, and they ran into a problem. And the submarine guys operate, of course, all over the planet. 71.02% or something like that is water on our planet. Most of it salt water, most of it ocean. And so Mike's got an issue. And so he wants to consult with our central character here because he knows he's not going to think in a normal fashion or in the usual fashion, and he's not going to get the regular thinking that Mike is not going to get the regular thinking that he's surrounded with. And that was exactly the situation. That's what Mike presents as soon as he gets on the phone and says, look, No matter where he turns, he gets the same set of 3 or 4 options. Mike's a good thinker. He likes to back up and analyze stuff, right? Get a broad view so he knows what he's actually trying to decide. Because frequently, if you're in the moment and you're looking at the extremist that is forcing you to take an action, you're trapped right there focused on that. And so you don't have a broad view. So anyway, so Mike calls our central character here, and they kick back, a cup of tea and a long conversation, and it comes to the point where our character has an understanding of what's going on, right? And the what's going on basically comes down to this, that our guys in our advanced submarines are able to go some level over the stated 40 miles an hour under the water. Maybe they go 80, 90 miles, right, an hour under the water. And they don't talk about it. It's secret shit. It's the specifications of the submarines, the hydrodynamics, and that sort of thing. But anyway, these guys are cruising around out in the Pacific, checking shit out, having fun days. And they start encountering these USOs, right? The undersea unknown objects. And they knew they were there. They see these other things they won't talk about. Which I suspect are giant mining machines. But in any event, so these guys are cruising around. They're trucking along at 42 miles an hour in their sub, and they get this hydrophonic, so off of sound coming through the microphones on the outside of the hull. They get this hydrophonic warning of something approaching them. You have to understand that if you have something moving through the water, even if it has unusual characteristics, it's still very likely to cause a sound to occur within the water itself, and that's what actually was going on here. This thing comes on up next to the submarine, and it whizzes by it. And, it was so fast they were uncertain as to how fast. But we're talking maybe as much as, at the time that it was moving over them, maybe it was moving at 500 miles an hour. Absolutely unheard of. And then, shock and horror, the thing passes over them to some extent, and they realize that it's about 400 to 500 feet long and almost that wide, and moving that fast under the water, and has no EMF signature. It's not radiating out any kind of frequency they can detect at all. And there's no cavitation, there's no water disturbance. It is moving through the water as though the water did not exist, and the water would disappear ahead of it and appear behind it. It was that fast and that freaky to them. So the submarine guys, that's way beyond their experience. They have no idea what to do with this, and it starts becoming more and more frequent. If they take their submarines over to a certain part of the the southwest Pacific Ocean, down near the South Pacific, the islands heading towards Australia, in that area, they get frequent encounters with these objects, which are in any number of shapes and sizes, but all have these same characteristics. They cause noise within the water only by virtue of their passing, not by virtue of their propulsion system. They emit no EMFs, and they will, after that first encounter here with this, and this is recent, right? So it's not like this has been going on forever and ever. This is a reasonably new set of circumstances. And so this big thing goes flying over the submarine. Bear in mind the submarine is trucking along at about 42 miles an hour, and this thing is moving maybe as much as 500. And it goes just beyond the size of the submarine, so it just passes over the top of it, and it stops instantly. Instantly. No wake, no shock, no nothing. It just stops. And the submarine is still continuing on its way as though there was nothing hanging over it that was, 4 or 5 times its size. And bear in mind, in water, the mass you're dealing with in water affects gravity of it within that field. So this is very unusual. And so the people in the submarine are freaking out because all of a sudden the noise stops. And it's not like it zipped away and faded out. The hydrophonic pickup just ceases, nothing. And then whatever it is backs up and hovers over them. And everybody is basically just shitting bricks. The hydrophonics stop again. And then they detect that, oh, it's moving exactly as fast as the sub. So it wasn't stopped, but it was moving so slow, it was matching their speed down to the 10th of a mile per hour. If they slowed down to 39.8, it slowed down. And it went on for some time. And then it took off. And they were left undisturbed after that. And that was even more freaky. So Mike's got all these concerns. And he wants to know, okay, how do we think about this? What would be a way to approach this? And so our central character here, he's sitting there having his tea, and he takes a big slurp, and he asks a bunch of questions, specifics. Could they detect any of this kind of stuff, and so on. And then he makes a statement to Mike that is very unusual, especially considering the security circumstances in this. And so he asked Mike if he could speak for about 5 minutes with one of the people that was on the boat. Not necessarily a captain, but someone who had, some responsibility there, helmsman, something like that. And so Mike says, Mike's a little freaky about this, but he says, we've got to deal with this. So he makes the arrangements. And there's a short little conversation. It only took a few minutes to confirm the suspicions, right? And the suspicion was that they were indeed, the machine, or whatever it is, was indeed dealing or emitting radiation. So the submarine was being scanned. It was just not in a form that we were usually able to detect, but it could be you can make a conclusion that you were detecting it if you looked at these 3 various different sensors and saw what was going on with them, which was very subtle, but it was the delta between the 3 that told you that this operation was occurring. And so our central character here, he gets that understanding. And then he says, I'm not really sure what it is, and I know probably why it's interested in you, and we can perform some experiments here. And it's going to sound really weird. Now, Mike's used to this. Our central character is batshit crazy, but his ideas frequently work out, so he's worth listening to. And so Mike says, okay, lay it on me. And so our guy here says, he said, it may or may not be inhabited in that sense. So it may just be an automated remote machine. But I think, based on what you told me about the actions and then the subsequent encounters by other submarines with other similar devices, says, I think I know what's going on. And if I'm correct, we can perform an experiment, and if the experiment is successful, they may leave you alone after that. Doesn't explain who they are or what the fuck they're doing or any of that, but it may eliminate this interruption in your activity as they come and check you out, right? And so he says, okay, well, what is it? And I said, and our central character here says, well, their radiation source is not EMF. Therefore, it's consciousness at some level. If you get beyond the EMF on either side, you're dealing with consciousness, whether it's light or extremely high frequencies. And so one thing, and so it could be that it's remotely controlled. It could be being controlled from some other planet. We don't know. Or it could be that it's inhabited. But its behavior suggests that you're a puzzle to it. And you're a puzzle to it because we deal in EMF, electromagnetic frequencies, and it does not. And there were some hints that what we call scalar was involved, but our definition of scalar comes from the Einsteinian understanding, which is bullshit. And scalar is an aspect of the ether approaching this point of consciousness in the ontological model. So anyway, so the suggestion is, as goofy as it sounds, is that sense that the scanning, the sensing that it was doing was to determine what the submarine is, and is it conscious? Is there anything in it? Because if you're using consciousness and we're emitting EMF, you're not going to see our EMF. And if you're using a shade of consciousness as your radiation source, and we use EMF, we're not really going to see that. It's not going to ping on our sensors, either of us. So the experiment is thus. Next time this happens, and deliberately try to to make it happen, like go out there and do something that would attract them. There had been some discussion about how these analyses that were being done by the other on the submarines could be impacted, they could be drawn by the activity of the sub. So I said, go on over and do that. And then find yourself a place within the submarine where people can touch metal that communicates to the outside. And this is difficult. These submarines have double hulls and insulation and all different kinds of things. But turns out there were 2 or 3 places. And I said, now, here's the weird part. You can't use your hands. And so Mike says, what? And I said, yeah, you're going to have people stand there, take their socks and shoes off, and put their feet on cold metal that will conduct them to the outside, to the water. And because the thinking is that it was the construction of the submarine that prevented the device above them from sensing the consciousness of the individuals involved. And so the machine above him didn't know if he was dealing with an automated thing or not. And so instructions are relayed, and people are told how to respond. Then the next time that this occurs, and it had been occurring quite frequently with different submarines, people go and take their socks or their shoes and socks off and stand on the cold metal that was able to communicate, that conducted. And there were other experiments done. Behavior of the machinery was noted, or behavior of the behavior of the object. It's unknown what it is, but anyway, the experiment is successful. Behavior had changed as a result of doing that, as though the sensory apparatus of the visitor was able to, at that point, detect that there was actually conscious life within the submarine. And that satisfied at least that level of its curiosity, and it went on its way. And when the others of its kind had come in close contact to the sub subsequent to that, they would basically just zip by. And so their behavior had changed. So much was learned from this little experiment of cold toes and out-of-the-box thinking on it, right? So it tells us a lot, and it suggests a lot, and there are some conclusions that one can make from the experiment and how it was done. And that there is, because of the way that the experiment was done, I mean, it was smart to do it this way. They did it one person at a time. So 4 or 5 people would gather at the appropriate spot to stand on the metal. One person does it. A few seconds later, another person takes their shoes and socks off and stands there. And we determined that there's a threshold of 3. So once you get 3 people standing there, you don't need 4 or 5. It'll cause the behavior change. And so the supposition is that what's going on is that the consciousness is allowed to connect through the metal, and the metal goes to the outside, to the water, and that the visitor is able to then detect that there's conscious life in these things, and it's like, oh, okay, that's fine, not going to mess with it. I can't mine it or whatever the hell it wants to do with it, because we don't know why it stopped to examine it. But at least the stops, the visitations in that regard, they end as a result of this behavior. Once 2 or 3 of the submarines do it, or 2 or 3 occurrences within the same sub, it stops. It ceases the whole level of activity. Of course, the real issue now is what's the next step in these interactions. And that's where interesting thought gets even more interesting. So I'll leave it there, and you can just consider we live in a very odd reality. And if you have the appropriate understanding of our odd reality, things can make a bit more sense than if not. And sometimes it's better to have old farts and cold toes as a solution than any of those that might be proffered by young minds with less experience. I'll put it that way. Not trying to be mysterious, but you understand.